And welcome to the UCFsports.com preview of this Saturday's game at Memphis. It's going to have a 3:30 kickoff on ESPN2, and I'm honored to be joined today by John Maddox of Tiger Sports Report. Thanks for joining me, John.
Hey, Brandon, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So, I'm excited about this one. In my eyes, and I think with honestly most UCF fans, I guess maybe other than USF, which is obviously the regional, rival for a long time, the heated rival. But I mean, talk about outside of that game, I think Memphis and maybe East Carolina are the two teams that UCF has the longest track record with. We view them as a conference rivalry. There's been some great games through the years against the Tigers. It was one-sided, as you know, for a long time. Both schools, when UCF entered Conference USA in 2005, I think UCF won, I think, the first 13 games. A long
Yeah.
time ago, in 1990, there was a game when UCF came to Memphis, and UCF was still a Division I AA program. Memphis won that game. But ever since then, I think UCF won the next 13 matchups, whether it was CUSA or the American, all the way until 2020, which I guess was Ryan Silverfield's first year. That was a crazy game. Memphis won 50-49. UCF, they basically had, I think, 798 yards of offense and lost. Well, they
And
gave
missed
up
the field goal. Yeah.
Yes, gave up 700, missed a field goal at the end. So that broke the streak for Memphis, and that was the last time UCF played in Memphis. So John, just first off, how do you view this series? Is it a rivalry to Memphis? Is this a game that maybe Memphis fans are going to sad to see come off the schedule next year when UCF goes to the Big 12?
I think it depends, like anything else, Brandon, on who you ask. As far as in terms of a rivalry, usually that requires both sides to kind of hold up their end and make it competitive. And, the average score in this series has been 38-23 over the years. In the last few years, it has gotten a lot tighter. But, this is a team that Memphis UCF has just had their number. I remember a 2014 Blake Bortles led UCF team that Memphis just drug up and down the field, and a couple wishy-washy calls, and then our coach gets a case of the dumb head and tries a halfback pass for a 2-point conversion that fails. Something most of us have never given Justin Fuente for, because that's a game we should have won. But it just seems like those are the things that happen. I can't remember the score, but I think it was the 17 championship down there. We jump out to a big, or 18, we jump out to a big halftime lead, and then UCF just comes out and blows us out in the second half. This is a game that, there is a little bit of bad blood, I think, on both sides, because we have, let's face it, we've been the two premier predominant teams in this league for the last 7 or 8 years running. And Memphis has, with the exception of the COVID year 2020, has just never been able to kind of get that bugaboo off their back. And, it is one of the games I think most of us fans will miss, because they have gotten competitive. And look, I'd much rather play UCF and Houston and Cincinnati than Tulsa and Rice and whatever menagerie is coming into the league as of right now. So it's a game we'll miss. It's a game that Memphis is looking forward to, and they know just as well as we do that this is kind of, for now anyway, depending on which way the conference winds blow, this is the last chance at a UCF team coming in here that we'll see in the regular season, probably, at least if Memphis were to make it to the Big 12 or whatever's left of the Big 12, for the foreseeable future. This is it.
Yeah. Are there any, off the top of your head, are there any like longtime players on Memphis, maybe fifth year seniors, players with a 6 year of COVID that maybe were around for those conference championship games? Is there anyone that's maybe in a fifth or sixth year that might actually remember some of the times when UCF and Memphis were, the two top teams in the league battling it out?
I don't, off the top of my head, I don't think so. Maybe, and again, I just have to go back and look, maybe
Yeah.
Quindell Johnson or Zay Cullins. But, we lost a lot of guys during COVID that would still be here. DeMonte Coxey, Kenneth Gainwell, these are guys that left. And, obviously Coxey went to the CFL and Gainwell goes to the NFL. So this crop, probably not. but you can bet your bottom dollar that Ryan Silverfield remembers it because he's going, officially with the program. This is year 7 or 8 for him. So,
Yeah.
he goes back and he's got history with UCF. So, it's definitely in his mind, and I'm certain that I can tell you that I've been in the building before, and tape of a couple of those championship games have been playing on the television. So they're not forgotten long memories. It's some of these wounds, despite the fact that some of the kids may not be here, are still pretty fresh.
Yeah, yeah. As far as the Big 12, yeah, I'm not alone in this opinion. I thought it should have been Memphis over Houston in terms of if you had to, put one in and take one out of the four teams, going into the Big 12. I mean, I try to look at it unbiasedly. I did feel UCF, BYU, and Cincinnati were definitely three. If you're going to pick four teams from the group of five, I said those three definitely should have been there, and I think Memphis should have been the fourth. And I know a lot of UCF fans feel that way. Obviously, I know Memphis fans feel the same. How did you guys take that news? Last year when that happened. I mean, obviously it was a disappointing day, but how have Memphis fans viewed it, and what's kind of the adjustment been like when they realize maybe what the landscape's going to be in the American and seeing how everything is Power Five and Group of Five.
Yeah, I think that we were well. Let me back up. Most fans had their feelings hurt. They were in their feelings about it a little bit because this is the second time basically the Big 12 has kind of rebuffed Memphis and said thanks but no thanks. I think the Houston thing bothered everyone, but for those of us that have been around this sport for a while and are aware that Texas is a state in the United States of America, and their politics work far differently than anyone else's. It wasn't really a surprise. Frankly, I think BYU may have been a little more of a shock because they have so many odd quirks about when
Yeah.
they can play and can't play, and they would kind of be an outlier. But Memphis made so much sense to give UCF and Cincinnati a travel partner. Because fans, it says Brandon, they just think about football and basketball. Well, there's softball and tennis and golf, and at Memphis we joke that we're a rifle school because we have a highly rated rifle team. But there's all these other sports that money is a real factor in this whole realignment. But I think many fans were probably we have a joke around here, we call it BFS, battered fan syndrome. So we while we were disappointed and angry a little bit, I think most of us kind of thought it was a bit of a long shot anyway, because look, UCF has invested in their program, Cincinnati has invested, and BYU has obviously invested. And there was a long stretch, Brandon, where Memphis didn't, where it was basketball 99.999% of the time. And just in the last 10, 12 years, have we decided that football is really what drives the bus. So we're playing from behind. But I'll also say, I don't think this is, to quote Monty Python, it's not dead yet. And I think Memphis fans are hopeful that when round 2 does happen and whatever that's going to look like, we all thought that USC and UCLA were setting off World War III a few months back when they decided to go the Big Ten. But I don't think it's done yet. I think that you're going to see some more moving and shaking. And I think Memphis is investing $250 million in a stadium. And I don't mean anything offensively by this, but Memphis isn't spending $250 million to play Rice on a Thursday night on CBS Sports
Right.
Network. So I think that's the realism, is Memphis feels very confident in the future in their position, that they're invested heavily.
So you're talking about investing for the future. I know at one point there was some talk about an on-campus stadium, but does it seem like everything now is moved towards refurbishing the Liberty Bowl? And that's been the traditional home for Memphis for, 50, 60 years or however long that stadium is, maybe longer than that. So is that sort of, that's where the focus is going to be going forward?
Yeah, I believe so. They did, we've done 2 reports that basically have said, okay, we could build an on-campus stadium, or we could refurbish what is now Simmons Bank Liberty Stadium. And the financial sense of this is that it's less expensive, frankly, for Memphis and the state of Tennessee and the city of Memphis to get together and kind of refurb the stadium. That makes a lot more sense financially. It's not what Memphis fans want to hear, But the reality of the situation is, and this is just being straight up. A lot of people go, well, UCF built their stadium. Yeah, and UCF stadium already needs a ton of work. And
It does.
it's what, Brandon, you guys had that 10 years at this point, maybe
It's been 15.
15 years.
Yeah.
And, it already needs, last time I was down there, a bolt fell out as I was walking. Like, it's the bounce house.
Yeah, I want
So,
to hear more about that because
yeah,
that was,
yeah,
I remember
well,
in 2007, in the first year, students were bouncing. I remember coming in at halftime and a bolt came down from the
yeah,
rafters and it didn't hit anyone, but it could have been serious if it hit someone on the top of the head.
yeah. I
Do you
mean,
remember when that happened?
not '07. I can't remember when I was down there, but it happened again. And I mean, it's,
Yeah.
it is what,
Yeah,
if
there's
you
been
don't,
some issues with the steel, with corrosion of the steel. They used the incorrect coating, so they've had to spend millions of dollars to reinforce it. And that's sort of, I think it's maybe the dirty, dark secret that we don't quite know what the longevity is and how much work really needs to be done to, keep it for the long haul.
and that's the feeling at Memphis is, okay, if we build something, being blunt, we're gonna have to do it on the cheap, and our weather's not the greatest sometimes, so this makes more sense. Now, my crazy out of the box conspiracy theorist opinion is what is eventually going to happen is the city is going to deed over. We have a children's museum and an old armory there in the stadium. They will eventually maybe deed that over to the U of M. U of M will build some kind of presence there, and we'll, quote, have our on campus stadium. But I think that's years and years away from happening. The thing that kills me about Simmons Bank Liberty Stadium is there's not a bad seat in the house. Like, it's a fantastic stadium. It just doesn't have the bells and whistles, and that's what the $250 million is going to help pay for, or getting the suites up to date and up to standards, to be able to drive more revenue. Because Memphis is also in a little unique situation that we have right now at least one other tenant. Of course, that's the AutoZone Liberty Bowl. And, if Deion Sanders didn't blow it up, we have a second tenant in the Southern Heritage Classic. Although, frankly, we don't know how that's going to continue without Jackson State, and whether that's just a ploy by Deion to get more money. We don't know yet. But, and that's always kind of been the knock, Brandon, is Memphis is playing in a rented stadium when we want to own our stadium. And I'm like, well, that's great, but owning your house is different than renting your house, because there's nobody to call when something goes wrong when you own your house. And so you have all the maintenance to think about. And so it just makes a lot more sense for a Memphis team that gets $7 million a year, and I can't remember the exact number in TV money, to let somebody else pay for an upgraded stadium. And maybe down the road, 20 years from now, if we're still on this mortal plane, maybe that's the time for an on-campus stadium.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about head coach Ryan Silverfield. He's been part of this Memphis staff for a long time. I actually remember him. One of his first coaching jobs was at UCF back in 06 and 07. He was a graduate assistant under George O'Leary. And I just kind of remember seeing him around and stuff, and kind of remember, oh, yeah, he's in the NFL now and making a name for himself. And he comes back to Memphis, I guess, with Mike Norvell. Or was he part of Fuente's staff?
No, he came with Mike.
He just came in with Mike
Yeah.
Norvell. All right, so he's on that staff. And I guess after 2019, Norvell moves on. Finally, I know there was always rumors every year he was going to go somewhere, but after that season, he moves on to Florida State. And Silverfield is named the coach. I guess he coached the team in the Cotton Bowl, right?
Yep.
In 2019. So he's been there. I guess this was his third season, 8-3 in 2020, 6-6 last season in 2021. And right now he's 4-4 in 2022. Memphis had definitely been considered one of the premier teams in the American for a few years there under Fuente and Norvell. So, I mean, it's trending downward a little bit. What's kind of the verdict on Ryan, how he's done, is how do fans view him, and is it fair to say he's on the hot seat?
If you think the 2016 and 2020 general elections divided a populace, well, let me tell you about the Memphis fan base with Ryan Silverfield. It really depends on who you ask. Most of us are very disappointed. That's just being incredibly blunt. But we feel that's partially because we feel like with the talent, or I'll just speak for me, Memphis has had their Brian will kill me, two of the three highest recruiting classes in their history under Coach Silverfield. And the development of players has not been there. And that's been probably the most frustrating thing. Is he on the hot seat? Uh, it depends on how you define a hot seat. I think if Memphis were to miss a bowl this year, which they would have to go 1-3 over their last 4 games, which include UCF, Tulsa, North Alabama, and SMU. And there's only one game on there that I would say is a almost 100% win, and that's North Alabama. I think the frustration has really mounted this year because we've won one game on the road in the conference in 2 years. We have blown 5 double-digit leads. We were down 35-0 to Tulane 2 weeks ago, and I'm not here to disparage Tulane, but that is something that should never happen at Memphis in football. That would be akin to me to UCF being down 35-0 to FAU at halftime.
Right.
Lane Kiffin's FAU teams. Love Willie Fritz, president of the fan club, but it's just something that shouldn't happen at Memphis. And I think while things are growing louder, what we were talking about a few minutes ago matters. The $250 million you're asking for a stadium, because Memphis has financial realities to consider. But what Memphis can't afford is the lesson we learned with Josh Pastner in basketball. You can't let a guy just kind of languish and just kind of hang around and do just enough to win, and people quit showing up. Tubby Smith, another example of that, won 20 games a season while he was here, but people just kind of voted with their pocketbooks. And Memphis knows that right now they can't afford to do that. And I'll just tell you that Memphis football is teetering on the brink of apathy, which to me is far worse than being terrible or being great. Like, it's for people to forget about you. Just ask DePaul basketball how that works. Memphis also enjoyed an advantage in football when, frankly, Tiger basketball was on the downswing. And Memphis fans were looking for something to be excited about. And the Grizzlies weren't great. Well, now Memphis basketball is better. The Grizzlies are fantastic. So Tiger football is kind of at a crossroads here. The other knock that most people will say is that Memphis kind of broke their pattern when they hired Norvell, and when they hired Fuente. They hired young, up-and-coming, highly thought-of offensive coordinators. Ryan Silverfield's never been anything other than offensive line coach. He did not play a minute of college football. He's one of only 3 coaches in the NCAA that says that. And I think that his struggles have been magnified because the same things keep happening over and over again, and they keep making appearances at just the most inopportune times. The East Carolina loss, that's a game obviously we should have won. We're up double digits in that game. And East Carolina's a good team, and they played hard and came back, down 35-0 to Tulane, and just absolutely gave the Houston game away. And then you only beat Temple 24-3, and that's a team you really should get after and throttle a little bit.
UCF scored 70 on Temple. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's, you should get after them and throttle them a little bit. So I think his seat may be hotter than some people want it to be. But I do think that money is going to play a factor in this. And that's the other thing. We are not paying assistants what we paid assistants under Mike Norvell and Justin Fuente. And that's where it shows up is, I keep saying that about like Auburn, like the head coach is great and you need to pay a head coach. But if you're not paying your assistants, you're not going to have any staff continuity, and you're not going to have good assistants. And that's, that's what makes or breaks a head coach, especially a young one like Ryan Silverfield.
How has the transfer portal been working out for Memphis? Has it been more of a positive? Has it been a negative with players leaving the program that you didn't want to see go? How would you kind of evaluate how that's fit into everything and what Silverfield has been faced with?
I think it's kind of been 50-50. We've got a couple of guys that have come home. Cravante Hamilton came home from Ohio State, and he's been really good on the defensive line. Sincere Evans, a linebacker, came back from Coastal Carolina. He's been pretty good. But, we lost Taj Washington, who was going to be a fantastic receiver. He would have been a 5th-year starter this year for us. With the COVID year, he went to USC, and he's He's been lights out there, but it's been, hit or miss. Jay Ducker's a guy that was, MAC freshman of the year that came in from Northern Illinois, hasn't really been able to see the field that much. Jeffrey Canton Arku came in from Syracuse. Julian Barnett came over from Michigan State, and it's just been, guys have been decent and they've been contributing, but nobody has really just jumped off the page. Chris Howard, honestly, and he was a grad transfer from Florida. That dude has been a godsend for Memphis. He completely changes the way we have to call football games. I think Memphis went for fourth down literally 25% of the time last year because we had 0 in the kicking game. And our fourth down attempts are way down this year because Howard has been so reliable. So, and, special teams probably lost us 3 games last year. So it's been a little hit or miss. Nobody has really flamed out. I just think that the season is kind of this sputtering, almost Fred Flintstone start with your feet kind of year. So it's really hard to tell, hey, this guy's really stood out. This guy hadn't. Eddie Lewis is a guy that's been great for Memphis, transferred in from Rutgers. He's had some drop issues. Joe Skates from Iowa State, drop issues, but when he's on, man, he's on. So it's been 50-50. I think Memphis has gotten more than they've lost, but, these guys that came from these big programs, they're going to have to step up and continue to help Memphis grow, because the transfer portal, if you don't manage that, you're not going to be any good. And it doesn't matter what school you're at. Every team needs a general manager. Every team needs they used to call it director of player personnel. You need
right.
This GM, almost HR type that goes in and this kid's out there, that kid, and do the due diligence and just, you've got to get your hands around it.
Right. So I kind of overview some stats of this year's team. Memphis is 4th in the American in scoring, averaging 34.6 points per game. 9th in scoring defense, allowing 31.1 points per game. It seems like the verdict is UCF is a pretty good rushing defense, maybe not so hot in passing defense. I think they're last in the American as far as that goes. But to talk about the quarterback, Seth Hennigan, he's 3rd in the league in passing, behind SMU's Tanner Mordecai and ECU's Holt Naylor. So what's the verdict on Hennigan? Are you guys pretty satisfied with his performance? Is he up and down? How has he performed this season?
I think one thing that he has added this year to his game is the running game. Last year he was very timid. He's the first true freshman to ever start for Memphis in program history. But played it probably honestly in front of some bigger crowds in high school in Texas. Smart kid. Coach's kid, knows where to go with the football. But I think one of the frustrations with him this year is, and I said this on our show on Tigers Night last week, he's the same dude. Like, there hasn't been a huge slump, but there hasn't been a big progression. Like, he's the same guy. Like, I think he was completing 62% of his passes last year. He's at 63% this year. He had, through this time last year, he had 15 touchdowns and 5 interceptions, or 18 and 5. He's got 15 and 5 this year. And there's just not been a lot of change. Our passing yards are down from last year pretty significantly. We were in the 320s or so last year, and we're in the upper 280s this year, around 285 a game. So I think Memphis fans still love him. I think he's a gamer. I mean, I'll say that about him. He's a tough kid. And I just think a little of the frustration is there hasn't been a lot of improvement. There hasn't been development. Now, he's got a brand new offensive coordinator and quarterback coach. Does that have something to do with it? Probably. But yeah, I think that's the frustration, but Memphis still loves him. He's just a gamer. He's a good kid. He's tough as nails. The offensive line play has been awful at times this year. It's just been brutal, and he's just kind of stuck it out, and he's taken a few big hits, but he put on about 20 pounds in the offseason. He joked with me at Tulane after the game. He said he put on 5 more eating in New Orleans the night before. But no, he's put on about 20 pounds of muscle, and so he's more confident this year running the ball, but the production just hasn't been what it should be.
Yeah, who are some other guys on offense to watch? Are there, 2 or 3 names of some playmakers or guys that we're definitely going to hear their names called on Saturday?
Well, if Memphis is playing correctly, you're going to hear Joe Skate's name called because he's the guy that can take the top off the defense. Memphis had Calvin Austin the third last year, who was a little guy that could do that. Well, Skates is a guy that can go. That's a bigger. He's 6'3". He can go across the middle. He can run the post. He can run the fly patterns. He's a guy that can take the top off the defense. Memphis will also get Asa Martin back this week. Asa is a dynamic player. He plays running back. But he's a guy you can split out wide. You can get him the ball out of the backfield, get it to him on screens. He's just a guy. He played at Miami for a year. He can make people miss. He's a big part of this Memphis offense when he's healthy. He is a difference maker. Eddie Lewis, the team calls him Steady Eddie. That's what he does. He's going to catch. And then, of course, Caden Priestcorn has been lights out at the tight end position this year. We were very worried about that spot, losing a kid like Sean Dykes last year. And Priestcorn has just been fantastic for Memphis and especially in the red zone. And that's probably the guy that UCF is going to have to watch more than anybody else. But it's also going to be important when Memphis does get in the red zone. Memphis is scoring 94% of the time in the red zone. And a lot of that is Caden Priestcorn. But Memphis is going to have to find other options because as we know how good Caden Priestcorn is, you can bet Gus Malzahn and Travis Williams know how good he is too. So Memphis is going to have to find other options. But to me, it's Asa Martin and Caden Priestcorn. Those are the two guys that will make or break the Tigers on Saturday on offense.
I was looking at the other side of the ball, defense. What's been maybe the overall verdict on the defense, how they performed? Is there a strength? Is there a major weakness? And who are some of the top names of guys to kind of pay attention to on that side?
When Memphis presses and when Memphis plays fast and brings pressure, the Memphis defense is one of the best in the league. But when Memphis gets up 2 scores, 3 scores, and starts shelling and rushing 4 and dropping 7 with 2 high safeties, we get eaten alive by the quarterbacks in this league. So Memphis just has to figure out, and they can't play the way you can't play with your hair on fire the entire game. But when Memphis has been good, that's what they've done. We had coming into this year, we had a streak of 12 straight games with a turnover. It's no coincidence to me that streak was broken in the Houston game, and now Memphis is on a skid. Quindell Johnson still leads the AAC with 3 interceptions. Zay Cullins is tops in the league in tackles. He's our second leading tackler. He's a kind of a hybrid, almost a safety linebacker hybrid. But we really missed Quindell when he was out for 2 weeks. He's kind of the quarterback of the defense. We already talked about Cromartie Hamilton, Mordelius Ducksworth. What a great name for a football player. He's big along the line. But, Memphis is only 10th in tackles for loss in the league. They're only getting 4.88 per game and 9th in sacks. So we're not getting enough pressure up front. And that, Brandon, as you know, that it's defense is kind of this rolling snowball of if you don't get pressure up front, you're asking the linebackers to have to cover too wide of ground, and then you're asking the secondary to have to cover guys longer, and it's a snowball that rolls downhill. We've been pretty good against the run, but again, we've got to be more consistent with our pressures. Got Jalen Allen is just a motor guy. He's just Tyler Murray. We've got a lot of good players, but as Coach Silverfield has said before, football is the ultimate team game. 10 guys do their job and 1 guy doesn't. Then the whole thing's blown up. We've got Greg Rubin who's come back, and he's shown flashes of honestly being an NFL guy. And then there are times he just gets burned. And, secondary's been a struggle a little bit, but again, how much of that is not getting pressure? It's not really fair to say, oh, the secondary's terrible. Well, you're asking the secondary to cover guys like Ryan O'Keefe for 5.5 seconds, and that's too much.
I've been running a slideshow of photos from the 2018 game at Memphis. That was the last one I was personally at, and these were the photos that I took down at field level. And I'm looking at the second half, and that's when it started to rain. There was a pretty bad downpour. I'm looking at the weather forecast.
Yeah.
Hopefully it changes. I know today it makes it look like there's a very strong chance of rain. Maybe there's a storm front coming through. Hopefully it changes and it's going to avoid the game time hours. But when you look at Saturday with UCF, We think Mikey Keene's going to start. John Rice Plumlee entered the season as a starting quarterback. Mikey Keene was a starter last year, but Plumlee suffered a concussion against Cincinnati, and
Boy, that was a nasty hit he took
it,
too.
and he got up and was wobbly, and then he fell back down, and then he came back. They put sunglasses on him, so we know how serious concussions are, especially with what happened to Tua this season. I don't think any program's going to rush anybody back. So I would say the expectation from UCF fans, anyways, at Mikey Keene, and he did a great job. I mean, Mikey Keene, a lot of people thought he was going to be the starting quarterback this year. It was kind of a surprise to us. Just based on chatter around the program that Plumlee was named the starter. So, we'll see how that goes. I don't know if, a rain could obviously change a game plan and what you do, but looking at the Memphis perspective, what needs to go right, in your opinion, for Memphis to have a chance to beat UCF? Are there some things you want to see early that, would make you feel better about Memphis's chances against the Knights?
I don't want to see Memphis jump out to a big lead, as crazy as that sounds. Because
that does sound crazy, but that's happened. You've been burned by that.
Yeah, it's been our recipe for disaster 2 times this year. I think what John Reese brings that Mikey doesn't bring is Plumlee can run the football a little more. He's a little more of an athletic threat, which frankly probably worries Memphis a little more. But, if you remember last year's game, Seth Hennigan's hurt and Peter Parrish has to step in. The comparison ends right there. And UCF, I think, picked Parrish off 4 times, and we just couldn't get anything going offensively. But, I think the big thing is Memphis, we have to get off to a good start. I'm not saying come out and blow the doors off because that, again, and that sounds wild, but Memphis has yet to play 4 quarters this year, Brandon. We've got to figure out how to level some of this out. Does the second half team against Tulane come out? Memphis has a chance. Memphis has to force some turnovers. That's kind of the big thing to me is we've got to get back. If Memphis has struggled from an identity perspective, but if one thing we've kind of hung our hat on is being able to force turnovers. And the other thing, one of the things that kind of jumped off the page to me, Memphis is 94% in the red zone and UCF is 74%. So Memphis is going to have to take advantages of their opportunities in the red zone. And when UCF gets in the red zone, they're going to have to hold them to field goals because, and the other thing we can't do is we can't let UCF take 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 play drives because that's when Memphis gets in trouble. Although UCF isn't really built that way, the Gus Bus rolls pretty quick, but this can't be a 40-minute UCF time of possession, 20-minute Memphis game. Memphis has got to get off the field on 3rd down. Brandon, you can pass this to the coaching staff. If UCF wants success, let it be 3rd and 8 or more because that's where, and again, that sounds wild, but that is where Memphis has struggled getting off the field. In the first half against Tulane, they faced, I think it was 6, 3rd and 8 or more, and Tulane was 6 of 6. You just can't do that, especially against somebody like UCF. And we can't turn the ball over. But I always say about turnovers, it's kind of weird. If you turn it over on the UCF 20, that's a little different than turning it over on your 20.
Right.
Because UCF is a good enough team. They don't need the help. We've got to limit their possessions, and we've got to do something we haven't done all year, and that's run the freaking football. I mean, we have just not been good running the ball, and that's how we keep Mike. It doesn't matter if it's Mikey Keene or John Reese or Gus Malzahn. We just got to keep people. We got to keep that UCF offense off the field. And we've got to understand that Ryan O'Keefe is going to get his. We just can't let anybody else beat us. And that's kind of the mantra we have to have going into this one.
I'm going to be heading up to Memphis a little bit earlier than I usually head to games. I got some family in the area. I haven't seen them in 4 years ever since that 2018 game. So I'm already pretty familiar with a lot of the hot food spots around Memphis. I know a lot of fans are going to be making the trip. As someone from Memphis, are there some recommendations or what are some of your favorite places? And maybe do you have a favorite barbecue spot?
So I've got 3 barbecue places that I love more than most. Central Barbecue is what I recommend for anybody because they don't have the best anything in town, but everything is top 3. So that's a good one. And being a dry rib worshiper, you got to get them muddy at Central where it's a mix of the dry and the wet. It's fantastic. If you want pulled pork on Texas toast, the way the good Lord intended us to have it, that's the barbecue shop on Madison. And a sneaky good one is I actually live just south of Memphis in North Mississippi. In South Haven, right off the interstate, there's a place called Memphis Barbecue Company.
Okay.
They've Melissa Cookston and her folks and John David Wheeler, they won Memphis in May 3 times. So those folks know what they're doing. Um, but other than barbecue, I mean, everything's kind of standard fare here. Um, if you want a good breakfast on Poplar, there's a place called Big Bad Breakfast. There's a couple of those. They're actually a franchise. They've got a couple locations here. It's really good, and it's hard to go wrong in this town with barbecue. Other than Corky's, just stay away from Corky's. You'll be fine.
Is Corky's open? I heard they had a fire.
Well, they've got
at
4
some point.
locations, and one of them did the main location on Poplar had a fire, but all's well that ends well there. And I'm not disparaging Corky's; it's fine. There's just many better options than Corky's.
Is that kind of like the Olive Garden of barbecue? Is this kind of the
I
generic?
wouldn't put it that. It's not quite that bad. It's just more that there's just so much better barbecue here than Corky's. Corky's is great. It gets a lot of the out-of-towners, obviously, because that's the name. You can get it shipped to you. But, if I had to say, hey, I can go to one barbecue place in Memphis, it would definitely be Central.
My favorite you didn't mention is a Germantown Commissary. I think that's been I haven't been there in 4 years, but through the years hit a lot of them, and I think that was my personal favorite. But I know every place can be hit or miss.
Yeah. It's not my favorite, but they just opened a new place out east and out in Collierville, actually, the Germantown Commissary in Collierville, and it's pretty good. I've been out there a couple times, but I'm just such a Central fan that it kind of ends up being my fallback.
Yeah, what's your favorite Central location? Is it the one on Central that's the original, not too far from the Liberty Bowl? Is that sort of the go-to location? Sometimes with barbecue places, location matters, even though it's the same name, the same menu. Sometimes some locations have a better reputation than others.
Yeah, people like the main location, but Central does a really nice job of. It's very consistent. Oh, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Gus's world famous fried chicken. That's another definite must-have when you're here. And you wonder why everybody here is overweight. It's because of all the barbecue and fried chicken. But yeah, I prefer the Poplar Avenue location. It's in East Memphis. For Central. It's in a great spot, right off the internet. It's a quarter mile off 240. The one by the Liberty Bowl. Boy, talk about old habits dying hard. The one by Simmons Bank Liberty Stadium is great. It gets a little crowded, but it's a great spot. But yeah, I'm a fan of the one on Poplar I'm all about ease of access, and that has that down pat.
All right. Well, I definitely am going to jot down those recommendations, and maybe I'll check out that Poplar spot at Central later on this week when I'm in town. But I appreciate it so much, John. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and maybe I'll see you at the game on Saturday. And thank you for your time.
No problem. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to seeing you.
All right, take care.
Thanks.